Ethan didn't plan the trip for any special reason. At least that's what he told himself. He just wanted his grandmother, Margaret, to smile again. Since his grandfather passed away 2 years ago, she had turned quiet, spending most days by the window of her old farmhouse, staring at the hills without saying much. She was still sharp and graceful, but there was a heaviness in her eyes that worried him. So when he suggested a weekend by the lake, she hesitated at first, then finally nodded. "Maybe it's time," she said softly, almost to herself. They drove north through winding forest roads until the trees opened up to a calm blue lake and a small town called Ashwood. The heart of the town was a cozy old hotel named the Silver Pines, in a place that looked like it belonged to another century. Its porch was lined with white chairs, the kind that creaked when you rocked back and forth, and the windows glowed with warm golden light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books. A grand piano stood in the corner of the lobby, and soft music drifted through the halls. Ethan felt something peaceful there, like time had slowed down just enough to let people breathe. Margaret seemed taken by the place the moment they walked in. Her steps slowed as her eyes wandered across the paintings on the walls and the vintage photographs of the lake. She smiled politely at the receptionist. But when her gaze landed on the staircase that curved upward toward the guest rooms, she paused for a second. Ethan noticed how she looked up like she was remembering something. He didn't ask. Their room was on the second floor, overlooking the water. The bed was covered in a quilt of faded blues and creams, and a small balcony opened toward the lake where the reflection of the sky shimmered like glass. Ethan dropped his bag, stretched, and looked around. "It's perfect," he said. "Feels like a storybook." Margaret didn't answer right away. She was standing by the window, her hands resting gently on the sill. "I never thought I'd see this view again," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "You've been here before." She turned her head slightly, giving him a small, nostalgic smile. "Once," she said. "A long, long time ago." Her voice was calm, but there was something in a tan emotion buried deep, as if every word carried a memory. Then she sat on the chair by the bed and sighed softly. "You know, life has a strange way of bringing us back to the places we thought we'd left behind." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance and rain began to fall in slow, steady drops against the balcony railing. The lake darkened under the storm clouds, and the lights from nearby cottages shimmered faintly through the mist. Ethan closed the window and turned on the small lamp beside the bed. The soft yellow light made the room feel warm and safe. He could hear the rain tapping gently on the roof, a quiet rhythm that filled the silence between them. Margaret spoke again, almost in a whisper. "Your grandfather and I never came here. This was before him, before everything." She looked lost in thought, her eyes far away. "It was summer. I was your age, full of plans, full of feelings I didn't understand. I met someone here." Ethan didn't press for details. He just listened. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the room with its steady sound. There was something strange but beautiful about that moment, his grandmother sitting there, wrapped in memories that seemed to belong to another world. Later that evening, they went down to the hotel's dining hall. It was nearly empty, just a few travelers scattered around candlelit tables. The walls were lined with framed black and white photographs, couples dancing by the lake, families posing beside wooden boats, soldiers in uniforms smiling proudly. Margaret looked at those photos longer than she looked at the menu. After dinner, they stepped outside under the covered porch. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. The lights from the hotel reflected softly on the whetstone path that led down toward the lake. "You picked a good place, Ethan," she said quietly. "It feels kind." Ethan chuckled. "Kind?" She nodded. "Some places hold good memories, even if they hurt a little. This is one of them." She gave him a quick smile before walking slowly toward the railing to look out over the water. Her hand trembled just slightly as she brushed the rain from her hair. For a moment, Ethan saw her not as his grandmother, but as a young woman, someone who had once dreamed, loved, and lost. He realized then how little he actually knew about her life before his grandfather. Families always talk about the same memories, the safe ones, but there were whole chapters of her story she had never told. And maybe this place held one of them. When they went back inside, the lobby was quiet except for the soft notes of piano music coming from the corner. A man was playing a slow, nostalgic tune, something from the 1940s, Ethan guessed. Margaret stopped mid-step when she heard it. Her face went still and her eyes glistened under the warm light. "That song," she whispered. "It was playing the night I left Ashwood." Ethan glanced at her, unsure what to say. The music continued gently, wrapping the room in its bittersweet melody. She turned to him then, a faint smile on her lips, but tears forming in her eyes. "Maybe coming here was meant to happen," she said. "Sometimes the heart needs to visit its old wounds before it can heal." Ethan didn't completely understand her words, but he felt them. Something inside him told him that this trip wasn't just about helping Hurt, was about discovering something long hidden. Something she had kept buried beneath years of silence and polite smiles. As they walked back to their room, the hallway lights flickered softly. Margaret brushed her hand along the wooden wall, as if feeling the years beneath her fingertips. When they reached their door, she paused and looked back toward the end of the hallway. "That used to be the ballroom," she said. "There were lanterns and music and laughter, and a promise I thought would last forever." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly caught herself and smiled. "Good night, dear." Ethan watched her as she closed the door and sat down on the edge of her bed. He wanted to ask what she meant by promise, but he didn't. Something told him she wasn't ready, not yet. He turned off the light, but long after the room went dark, could still hear the soft rain and the faint echo of that old piano tune drifting up from the lobby below. And somewhere deep in his heart, he felt that whatever secret this hotel held, they were both about to find it. That night, Ethan realized something simple and profound. This wasn't just a trip for his grandmother. It was a journey through time, through love, and through the quiet places where memory still breathes. And as the storm whispered outside their window, he couldn't shake the feeling that their weekend at the Silver Pines Inn was only just beginning. Ethan woke early the next morning, the sunlight breaking through the clouds and painting the lake with streaks of gold and silver. He dressed quickly, eager to explore the hotel and its surroundings, and found his grandmother already sitting by the window, sipping tea. Margaret looked calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes as she watched the water ripple in the morning breeze. Ethan joined her silently, taking in the view. The lake seemed alive, reflecting not just the sky, but something deeper, memories, stories, a history that belonged to her. After breakfast in the hotel dining hall, Ethan wandered through the lobby, drawn to a wall filled with old photographs. Couples danced in long gowns and uniforms. Children played near the lake, and families posed beside wooden boats. Each picture seemed frozen in time, yet full of life. Ethan stopped at one, in particular, black and white. Photo of a young woman in a flowing white dress standing next to a man in a navy uniform, both smiling at the camera. Something about the woman's expression made his heart skip a beat. He studied the photo carefully, and then he froze. The woman, her face, her posture, even the slight tilt of her head, was unmistakably his grandmother, Margaret. He blinked, certain he was imagining it, but the resemblance was undeniable. She looked so young, radiant, full of hope, a version of herself he had never seen. The man beside her, with his neat uniform and proud stance, looked strong and kind. He had the kind of presence that made you trust him at once. Ethan felt a strange thrill mixed with concern. He needed to know more. When he returned to the room, he couldn't contain his curiosity. "Grandma," he asked gently, "who is that in the photo? You look exactly like yourself." Margaret's hand froze on her teacup. She looked down, her lips pressing together. Ethan had never seen her like this before, so quiet, almost fragile. Finally she looked up, and a shadow of a smile crossed her face, tinged with sadness. "That was a long time ago," she said softly. "Before your grandfather, before everything changed. His name was James. I met him here at this very hotel." Ethan's curiosity deepened, and he leaned forward, listening intently. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret took a deep breath and began. We were young, full of dreams and hope. It was the summer before the war. I was working in the town, helping my parents with the inn they ran back then. James came here for the season. He was kind, full of life, and I fell in love. He promised me that after the war we would meet again at this hotel. I believed him with all my heart. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke, and Ethan could see the old longing behind her calm exterior. She paused, staring out the window at the lake as if she could see the past floating on the water. But the war changed everything. I thought he was gone. I believed he had left me behind. Your grandfather. He came later when my world was already empty. He was kind and steady, and I loved him too. But James, he stayed in my heart in a quiet way, a shadow of a memory I couldn't forget. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never imagined that his grandmother had a story like this, a love she carried silently for decades. He realized then how much of her life he had never known. How many hidden chapters there were beneath the gentle smile she always wore. Determined to uncover more, he decided to explore the hotel, hoping to find a clue about James. As he wandered the hallways, he noticed small details that seemed almost familiar. The same wooden railings, the patterned carpet, the tiny brass number plates on the doors. It was as if the hotel had remained frozen in time, holding memories that only someone like Margaret could unlock. In one quiet hallway, he came across a plaque listing the history of the hotel. It mentioned that during the war, many soldiers stayed here and some left notes or letters that were never delivered. Ethan's heart raced. Could there still be a message for his grandmother, hidden all these years? Back in the room, he shared his thoughts with Margaret. She looked thoughtful, a distant look in her eyes. Maybe, she said slowly, some promises are kept even if it takes decades to honor them. James, he left a piece of himself here. I never knew if I would ever see it again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the lake, Margaret suggested they take a walk along the shore. The water reflected shades of orange and pink, and the soft breeze carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Margaret walked slowly, leaning lightly on Ethan's arm. They reached an old wooden pier, and she paused, looking down at the water. I used to come here every day that summer, she said, voice low. James and I would sit at the end of this pier, talking about the future, about the life we imagined. I never thought I'd walk here again. Ethan watched her closely. Her expression was both wistful and peaceful, a complex mix of emotions that made his chest ache. Do you think he ever came back? He asked gently. Margaret shook her head. I thought he didn't. But perhaps some part of him stayed, waiting for the right moment. This hotel, this place, it has its own memory. It remembers us, even when we forget. They sat on the pier in silence, the water lapping softly against the wooden posts. Ethan could feel the weight of decades of longing and unspoken love around him. It was a heavy, beautiful feeling, one that connected him to his grandmother in a way he had never known. Later, back in the room, Margaret pulled out a small, worn notebook from her bag. She flipped through the pages filled with faded handwriting, sketches of the lake and little notes about the summer she had spent in Ashwood. Ethan watched her carefully. Each word, each drawing, told a story of a young woman in love, full of hope and fear. Waiting for something she didn't even know if she would get. I kept this, she said softly, because sometimes we need to remember the love that shaped us, even if it never returned the way we wanted. Ethan reached out and held her hand. You deserve to find it again, he said. His voice was firm but gentle, and Margaret looked at him with eyes that glistened in the soft lamplight. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe it's not too late. That night, as the hotel settled into quiet, Ethan couldn't sleep. He thought about the photograph, the notebook, the stories Margaret had shared. He felt the presence of someone, James, perhaps watching over the hotel, waiting for the moment to reveal himself. The rain returned softly outside, tapping against the window pane. A gentle reminder that time moved slowly, and yet, sometimes, it brought things back that had been lost. He realized that this trip was not just a getaway for his grandmother. It was a journey into the past, a chance to uncover a love story frozen in time. And deep down, he knew that the hotel held a secret, a promise that was still waiting to be fulfilled. Ethan resolved that they would find it together. As the night deepened, the piano in the lobby played a familiar tune, a soft, old jazz melody. Margaret listened from her window, her eyes closing briefly. Ethan watched her and understood something important. The past was alive here. Not as a shadow, but as a memory waiting to be felt again. Tomorrow, they would start uncovering it. Tonight, though, they could simply sit and listen, letting the music and the lake tell the story of love, loss, and hope that had begun so long ago. And somewhere, Ethan felt a quiet certainty that the next day would bring them closer to a revelation neither of them had expected, a discovery that could change everything they thought they knew about love and the heart. Ethan woke to a soft morning light spilling through the curtains, the lake shimmering under the rising sun. Margaret was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, a thoughtful expression on her face. Ethan poured some coffee and joined her quietly. Feeling that today would be different, something was waiting to be discovered, though he didn't know what yet. After breakfast, Ethan suggested they explore more of the hotel. Margaret agreed, though she moved slowly, her steps careful as she clutched her shawl around her shoulders. The hallways seemed different today, as if they were holding their breath, waiting. Ethan noticed a small brass plaque on a door he hadn't seen before, room 212. It looked ordinary, but slightly out of place, as if it hadn't been used for years. "Grandma," he said, pointing to the door. "Do you know this room?" Margaret's face changed instantly, a mixture of surprise and hesitation crossing her features. I think I do," she said quietly, stepping closer. "It's been locked for decades. I never thought I would see it again." Curiosity stirred in Ethan, and he asked the clerk at the reception about it. The clerk seemed hesitant at first, then finally said, "Room 212. Funny you mention it. We just reopened it last week. It was sealed for renovations decades ago, but it belonged to someone important once. I guess your grandmother has some history with it." Margaret looked startled, a faint color rising to her cheeks. "I suppose so," she whispered. Ethan could see that she was holding back emotions, memories trapped behind a careful smile. When they entered room 212, it was almost frozen in time. The furniture was simple, an elegant and old writing desk, a chair by the window, and a bed covered in a quilt that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Margaret moved slowly across the room, her fingers brushing over the desk and the bedspread, as if trying to remember something long forgotten. Then she noticed a yellowed envelope sitting on the writing desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. Ethan watched her, heart racing. The envelope was addressed in neat handwriting, faded but still legible. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written decades ago, dated 1946, signed by a man named James. Her hands shook as she read it, voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, hey! He survived the war. He came back here looking for me, but I had already gone. He left this, hoping I would return one day." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He waited. He asked, incredulous. Margaret nodded, holding the letter to her chest. "All this time, I thought he was gone forever. I believed he was lost. But he never gave up hope. He left me this." Voice cracked, and Ethan could see the flood of emotions she had kept inside for decades. Love, heartbreak, longing, and finally, a sense of reunion that didn't even need words. The room felt alive with the past. Every shadow, every beam of light seemed to carry James's presence. Margaret sat down by the window, the letter trembling in her hands. Ethan moved to stand beside her, offering his support silently. She looked at him and smiled faintly. "He waited for me. And yet I never knew." Ethan felt a strange mix of sadness and wonder. The story of his grandmother's hidden love, of a promise unbroken across decades, was more powerful than anything he could have imagined. He thought about the photo in the lobby, the notebook she had shown him the day before. Everything was connecting now. This letter was the final piece. As the day passed, Margaret kept the letter close, occasionally reading a line and smiling softly. Ethan noticed how her posture relaxed, how the years of unspoken longing seemed to lift just a little. They went for a walk by the lake in the afternoon. The sun reflected on the water, making it sparkle like 1,000 tiny lights. Margaret paused on the pier, looking out over the lake. "This was where we met every evening," she said quietly, voice carrying just enough for Ethan to hear. "I would sit here waiting for him, dreaming of the life we could have had." She touched the water lightly with her fingers. "And now? Somehow he found me again, even if it's only through this letter." Ethan reached out, placing his hand over hers. "You found him, Grandma? In a way, you're meeting him now." Casey listened. "Yes, and it's more than I ever hoped for." She let out a soft sigh and leaned slightly on his shoulder. There was a peace in her demeanor now, something that had been missing for decades. The lake shimmered beneath the soft breeze, carrying the quiet weight of love and time. Later that evening, they returned to the hotel lobby. The piano played a slow, tender tune, and Margaret paused in the doorway. "This song, he loved it," she whispered. Her eyes were fixed on the piano, almost as if she could see James sitting beside her, smiling and nodding. Ethan watched her closely, noticing the emotion that softened her normally composed face. Margaret and Ethan found a quiet corner by the fireplace. The hotel was almost empty, the flickering flames casting shadows across the room. She held the letter to her chest and spoke softly, recounting memories of her time with James, the laughter, the conversations, the way he had looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Ethan listened, captivated. He realized that these stories were more than nostalgia. They were the essence of her heart, the foundation of who she had become. The letter had reopened something within her, something tender and alive. Ethan could see it in the way she smiled, in the way she held herself, and in the spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for years. For the first time since the loss of his grandfather, he saw her truly happy, immersed in a memory that brought both joy and bittersweet longing. As the night deepened, Ethan and Margaret returned to room 2112 one last time. She placed the letter carefully on the writing desk and sat in the chair by the window. "I can't believe it took this long to find it," she whispered. "All these years I thought he was gone, and now he's here in a way I never imagined." Ethan sat beside her, feeling a deep connection not just to his grandmother, but to the story of love that had spanned decades. He realized how fragile and precious such moments were, how easily they could slip away, and yet how powerful they could remain, quietly shaping lives from afar. The wind rustled outside, carrying the scent of the lake and the forest beyond. Margaret leaned back, holding the letter, eyes closed, as if feeling James's presence in the room. Ethan watched her silently, understanding something profound. The heart does not forget, and true love does not fade. It waits patiently across years and miles, till the moment it can finally return. That night, as they went to bed, Ethan knew that tomorrow might bring even more surprises. The hotel had a story to tell, and they were just beginning to uncover it. Margaret slept peacefully, the letter clutched gently to her chest, while Ethan looked out at the dark lake, knowing that history, memory, and love were all alive here, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a certainty, a promise that room 212 had more to reveal, and that the connection between the past and the present was far from over. This was not just a room, not just a letter. It was a bridge across time, linking to hearts that had waited decades to meet again. And Ethan was determined to help his grandmother cross that bridge, to see the story through to its ending, whatever it might be. The next morning, the sky was clear, the storm of the previous days gone, leaving the lake sparkling under a bright sun. Ethan and Margaret had breakfast quietly. But there was an unspoken energy in the air, a sense that something important awaited them. Margaret seemed lighter, her eyes carrying a quiet glow as she folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her bag. She had spent years carrying memories alone, but now, with Ethan by her side, it felt as if those memories could breathe again. After breakfast, Margaret suggested a walk by the lake. Ethan agreed, sensing that she wanted to be near the water, near the place where her heart had once held both hope and heartbreak. The path was lined with wildflowers and smooth stones glistening from the rain earlier in the week. Margaret moved slowly, leaning lightly on Ethan's arm, her steps careful but steady. He noticed the faint smile that kept tugging at her lips. A mix of nostalgia and peace. They reached the old wooden pier that stretched into the lake. It was the same pier Margaret had mentioned before, the place where she had met James decades ago. She stopped at the edge, letting her hand brush the water lightly. Ethan could see her eyes glisten in the sunlight as she spoke softly. "This is where we would sit and talk every evening," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Where I believed in a future with him, even though I didn't know what it would look like." Ethan stood beside her, feeling the history in the air, the echoes of laughter, conversations, and a love that had lingered silently for decades. He wanted to say something, but he realized no words could capture what she felt. Instead, he gently offered his hand. Margaret looked at him, surprised, then slowly took it. Her fingers were warm and the gesture was comforting, grounding her to the present while honoring the past. She laughed softly, the sound mingling with the gentle lap of the water. "James loved music," she said, glancing toward the hotel. "He once told me that if we couldn't dance together again, I should dance for both of us." Ethan's heart caught at the bittersweet nature of her words. He looked at the phone in his pocket and hesitated, then smiled. Without a word, he played a soft jazz tune from the 1940s, one of the songs Margaret had mentioned before. Margaret's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed transported back to that long-ago summer. The young woman in the photograph dancing with a man she loved. Ethan extended his hand fully, inviting her to dance. She hesitated briefly, then allowed him to lead her. They began to sway gently, the rhythm slow and tender. The breeze carrying the faint scent of pine and wildflowers. The dance felt magical, almost timeless. Margaret closed her eyes, letting the music guide her movements, her body responding naturally, remembering the motions of a dance she had done only in memory. Ethan held her steady, aware of the deep emotional weight of the moment. It was more than a dance, it was a reunion with a piece of her heart she had thought lost forever. "You don't have to talk," Ethan said softly. "Just feel it." Margaret smiled, eyes glistening. "It's more than I ever hoped for," she whispered. She leaned slightly against him, trusting him to hold the moment, to protect it. They moved together, small steps and gentle turns. The world around them fading as the lake shimmered in the afternoon sun. As the song ended, they paused on the pier, looking out at the water. Margaret's eyes were filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. The deep understanding that some loves are never fully gone, they merely wait for the right moment to be remembered. Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked at him, not with the grandmotherly warmth alone, but with a quiet, luminous sense of peace. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she said. "All these years I carried hope and heartbreak together. But now I understand. Love doesn't disappear, it waits. It stays alive in small ways, in memories, in moments like this." Ethan nodded, sensing the depth of her realization. The hotel, the lake, the letter, it had all conspired to bring her to this point, to help her reconnect with a love she had never fully lost. They stayed on the pier until the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the lake with shades of gold, pink, and orange. Margaret leaned back slightly, her hand resting on Ethan's arm, and sighed contentedly. "Thank you, Ethan. You brought me here, and I didn't expect to find peace, but I did. I didn't expect to feel this. Alive." Ethan smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and wonder. This trip had begun as a simple gesture to cheer up his grandmother, but it had transformed into a journey through time, memory, and love. He realized that sometimes the past and present can meet in the most unexpected ways, creating moments that heal, that reconnect, that remind people of who they once were and what they are capable of feeling again. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, they walked slowly back to the hotel, their steps light and unhurried. Margaret carried the letter with her, close to her heart, a tangible connection to James, a reminder of the love that had shaped her life. Ethan felt the quiet joy in her presence. The peace that comes from confronting old wounds and discovering they were not as empty as once thought. Back in their room, Margaret sat by the window, looking out at the lake under the stars. Ethan joined her, sitting quietly beside her, the letter on her lap. They didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. The night, the lake, the hotel, and the memory of James created a gentle cocoon of emotions: love, longing, nostalgia, and finally, closure. "I feel like he's here with us," Margaret said softly, her fingers tracing the envelope. "Not in person, but in spirit. Watching, waiting, happy that I finally understand." Ethan nodded. "He's part of the story now, and so are we. We'll remember him together." They stayed by the window long into the night, listening to the soft sounds of the hotel, the faint piano in the lobby, the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees, the quiet lap of the lake against the shore. Each sound seemed to carry a story, a memory, a piece of the past that had waited patiently for the right moment to be felt again. Eventually, Margaret leaned against Ethan, tired but content. "This hotel, this trip. It's more than a getaway. It's a bridge to my past, to a love I thought I had lost forever. And now, I feel complete in a way I never imagined." It began like any other for Sarah Walker, a single mother who had built her life around quiet routines and simple joys. The sun was soft, the kitchen was warm, and she was preparing her usual cup of coffee while thinking about the week ahead. Everything felt calm until her 21-year-old son, Ethan, entered the room with an expression that didn't match the peaceful morning. Ethan usually greeted her with a smile, or at least a relaxed nod. But today, he stopped at the doorway, unsure, as if he wasn't sure he should enter. His shoulders were tense, his eyes restless, and even his breathing seemed tight. Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong. A mother doesn't need words to recognize the weight her child is carrying. He sat at the table without taking his usual deep breath or stretching as he always did. His hands were trembling slightly, and when he finally looked at her, the worry in his gaze was unmistakable. Sarah put down her coffee cup, suddenly alert. "Ethan, what happened?" she asked gently. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then lowered his eyes to the table. The silence between them grew thick. It wasn't the silence of anger or distance, it was the silence of a heart struggling to speak. "Mom, I need to ask you something important," he said, his voice just above a whisper. Sarah straightened, her heart tightening with concern. Ethan wasn't dramatic, and he wasn't the type to make a big deal out of normal problems. If he said something was important, it usually meant he was hurting more than he wanted to admit. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady so he wouldn't feel pressured. Ethan hesitated again, longer this time. The light from the window fell across his face, revealing how tired he looked, as if he hadn't slept well for days. He finally lifted his eyes to hers, and what she saw in them made her breath catch fear. Confusion and something vulnerable she hadn't seen since he was a boy trying to understand the world. "Mom, can you help me understand how to love someone the right way?" he asked. The question stunned her. She had expected maybe trouble at college, maybe a problem with a friend, maybe something about work or stress. But this was deeper. This was the kind of question someone asked when their heart was tied in knots. Sarah didn't answer right away. She didn't want to say the wrong thing or make him feel embarrassed. She studied his face, trying to understand where the question was coming from. Ethan wasn't asking anything wrong or inappropriate. His tone wasn't romantic or confused in a troubling way. It was emotional, honest, full of the raw uncertainty young adults feel when they enter real love for the first time. But before she could ask him to explain, he continued, his voice lower, heavier. "I think I've been feeling something I shouldn't, and I don't know what to do." The words hit Sarah like a cold gust of wind. Not because they suggested something inappropriate, he didn't say anything that crossed any line. But his heart was obviously tangled in emotions he didn't understand. And the thought that he had been dealing with this alone made her chest ache. "What do you mean, Ethan?" she asked gently, trying not to sound alarmed. He looked like he wanted to speak again, but something held him back. He opened his mouth, and suddenly the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room like a sudden strike of lightning. Ethan froze, pulled away from the moment, and the heaviness of his confession was left hanging in the air. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, wanting him to stay, wanting him to finish. But the bell rang again. "I'll get it," she said reluctantly. Though her heart was still with him, she walked to the door, each step heavy with unanswered questions. Ethan stayed at the table, unmoving, staring down as if trying to gather the courage. He had just lost. The moment had been broken. Neither of them knew if it would return. In the same way again when Sarah opened the door and saw their neighbor standing there with a bundle of misdelivered mail, she smiled politely. But her mind was still in the kitchen. She signed for the envelope quickly and shut the door. When she returned, Ethan was gone. Having slipped upstairs before she could say another word, the question lingered in the quiet house, waiting for the moment when he would gather the courage to finish what he had begun. After the neighbor left and the door closed, Sarah stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything left unsaid. The quiet house felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves had heard Ethan's trembling voice and were holding on to his confession. She walked back to the kitchen, but the chair where Ethan had sat was empty, pushed back just slightly, as though he had risen quickly. Eager to escape his own feelings, she sighed softly, touched the back of the chair, then looked toward the stairs. She wanted to call his name, pull him back, ask him to finish the sentence he had begun, but she stopped herself. Ethan had always been gentle but private. When he walked away like that, it meant he needed time to settle the storm inside him. Hours passed with the house unusually quiet. Sarah cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, but her thoughts kept circling back to him. She replayed his words again and again. "Mom, can you help me understand how to love someone the right way?" And then, "I've been feeling something I shouldn't." The statements echoed in her mind, but she refused to jump to conclusions. Ethan wasn't lost, just confused, emotional, and young. His heart was open, but inexperienced. And she knew how frightening that could be. By late afternoon, she finally found him sitting outside on the front porch steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. His shoulders were hunched forward, his hands locked together, his eyes glued to the far horizon as though searching for answers he didn't yet have. Sarah stepped outside quietly, not wanting to startle him. She sat beside him, leaving enough space to show respect, but close enough to offer comfort. "Ethan," she said softly, "earlier today, you looked scared. You don't have to face whatever this is alone." He kept staring forward for a moment longer, then exhaled shakily. "I know, Mom," he said. "I just needed to breathe." She nodded. "You scared me, sweetheart. You said you were feeling something you shouldn't. What did you mean?" Ethan lowered his head, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes not from lack of sleep, but from carrying emotions too heavy for the heart. "It's not wrong," he said quietly, "just confusing." Sarah turned her body slightly to face him, wanting him to know he had her full attention. "Talk to me. Tell me what's confusing." He hesitated, as though sorting through thoughts he wasn't ready to fully share. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "There's someone I care about, more than I should," he said. "Someone I can't stop thinking about. Someone who feels important. Too important." Sarah felt a twist in her chest, not fear, but a deep understanding. She had been young once. She knew how feelings could spill over before you were ready. "Is it someone you can't be with?" she asked calmly. "It's someone I don't think I have the right to want," Ethan answered softly. "Someone who probably doesn't feel the same." Sarah rested her hand on his, a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone. "Love is always confusing at first," she said. "But caring about someone isn't wrong. It just means you're human." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. But he didn't elaborate, not yet. He wasn't ready to reveal the name hidden in his heart. Before she could press gently, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his whole expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His breath caught, his shoulders tensed slightly. And a shadow passed over his face. Sarah leaned forward and saw the name glowing on the screen. Lily. Her heart stilled for a moment. Lily wasn't a stranger. She had been visiting their home for years, practically growing up alongside Ethan. She had shared dinners with them, helped Sarah with small tasks, and often studied with Ethan at the dining table. She was sweet, polite, and always soft-spoken. Sarah had always liked her, but she had never imagined Lily might be the center of Ethan's emotional struggle. The message preview appeared. "Can we talk? I need to see you, please." Ethan swallowed hard. Weighing the words, "You should go," Sarah said quietly. Even though her heart squeezed at the thought of him walking toward something that might hurt him, he nodded, stood slowly, then paused as if waiting for her to say something comforting. "Ethan," she said, standing beside him, "whatever this is, you'll be okay. I'm right here always." He gave a small, sad smile and walked down the driveway. Heading toward whatever truth Lily held in her message, Sarah watched him disappear down the street, feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. She whispered a quiet prayer into the cooling air, hoping Lily would be gentle with him. Inside, the house felt bigger and emptier than ever, because tonight Ethan wasn't just walking to see a friend. He was walking toward the moment that might break his heart, or help him understand it. Ethan returned from the cafe late in the evening, and Sarah could immediately tell that something significant had happened. His shoulders were slumped, his steps slower than usual, and his face bore the quiet weight of disappointment. He didn't rush past her or hide in his room. He sat down carefully on the couch as if bracing himself to share what had happened. The warmth of the living room felt heavier with tension, and Sarah sensed that tonight the emotions her son had been holding inside for days were ready to spill over. She sat beside him, careful not to rush. "Ethan, how did it go?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. She didn't want him to feel pressured, but she needed to know what had shaken him. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. I told her the truth," he said slowly, his voice fragile. "I told Lily how I feel." Sarah's heart beat faster. She had expected honesty, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her stomach tighten. She gently asked, and his breath hitched and his shoulders sank even lower. She sees me like a brother," he admitted, the words coming out in a rush of frustration and heartbreak. "She said I'm confused, that I don't understand my feelings." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his arm, feeling the tremor in his skin. It was the tremor of a heart that wanted something so badly it hurt to hold it back. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak, letting the words release some of the tension he had been carrying. "But, Mom," he continued, his voice almost a whisper, "I know what I feel. I know it's not confusion. I care about her deeply. I don't know if I'm allowed to want it." His eyes filled with tears, and he finally met hers. They were raw and vulnerable, desperate for understanding. Sarah could feel the depth of his emotions. She understood his heartbreak because she had been there too. Once feeling a love that scared her, longing for someone she couldn't fully reach. But this wasn't about her past. This was about guiding her son through his first real emotional storm. "You're allowed to want love." "Ethan," she said quietly, holding his gaze. "Wanting someone, caring for someone, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. It means you feel deeply, and there's nothing wrong with that." He took a deep breath, shaking slightly, as if absorbing the words she had been giving him. Sarah kept her hand on his, warm and reassuring, letting him feel the grounding comfort of her presence. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock, marking time that seemed slower now, heavy with unspoken truths. I thought she might feel the same," he murmured. "I thought maybe she could see what I feel, but she doesn't. She doesn't see me that way." His voice broke at the end, small, delicate, and full of longing. Sarah squeezed his hand gently, trying to convey through touch what words sometimes couldn't express. Ethan, she said softly, sometimes the people we care about the most aren't ready to love us the way we hope. That doesn't make your feelings wrong. It means your heart is learning, growing, and preparing for someone who will. He leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling as if trying to find a way to accept that truth. His breathing was uneven, caught between despair and relief. Because while the rejection had stung, sharing it had lifted some of the weight he had been carrying alone. Then, in a quiet, trembling voice, he said something that took Sarah by surprise. "Mom, you're the only person who makes me feel understood. The only person I trust with my whole heart." Her chest tightened at his words, not alarm, not fear, but the pure, unfiltered honesty of a young man who had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't inappropriate or unhealthy. It was the depth of trust, the kind of emotional bond that a mother and child share at its purest form. Sarah looked at him, her eyes gentle, unwavering. "I understand, Ethan, and I will always be here for you," she said. "But you have to know that my love is guidance, not a replacement for love you'll share with someone your age." He nodded slowly, the tears still shimmering on his cheeks. "I know, Mom. I needed you to hear me. I needed someone to help me make sense of it." Sarah hugged him softly, letting him lean on her. The weight of the evening, the heartbreak, the confusion, all of it, felt like it could breathe freely now, finally shared. "You'll heal, Ethan," she whispered. "You'll find someone who sees your heart and matches it. But until then, it's okay to feel what you feel." Ethan closed his eyes, resting his head against her shoulder. The tension in his body eased, if only slightly. Tonight, he hadn't solved everything. He hadn't found love, and he hadn't stopped longing. But he had found understanding and sometimes. That was the first step toward healing. Outside, the night was quiet. Stars beginning to shine through the darkening sky. Inside, the bond between mother and son had deepened not through romance, not through possession, but through honesty, empathy, and the quiet acceptance of feelings too big to face alone. And in that moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. The house was quiet after. Ethan returned from his heart-to-heart with Lily. Sarah watched him sit on the couch, shoulders slumped, eyes distant, carrying the weight of disappointment and longing. She didn't rush to speak, didn't try to fix the moment with quick words. Instead, she waited, letting him gather the courage to express the storm inside him. She had learned that sometimes the strongest support comes from quiet presence rather than advice. Finally, Ethan turned to her, his gaze vulnerable. "Mom, I don't know what to do with my feelings," he whispered. "I feel like my heart is too full, too heavy. I don't know how to move on, or if I even should." Sarah reached out, placing her hand gently over his. The warmth of her touch was meant to reassure, not to control. She wanted him to feel safe, to understand that, while she could guide him, he had to walk his own path toward emotional clarity. "Ethan," she said softly, "sometimes hearts feel too full because they're learning what it means to care, what it means to long, and what it means to heal. It's not wrong to feel this way. It's not shameful. It's human." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He wanted guidance, but he also wanted understanding, a validation that his emotions were real and worthy. Sarah knew this moment was critical. If she said too much, she might smother his independence. If she said too little, he might feel abandoned. She chose her words carefully. "You need to understand something important," she continued. "The love I give you is different from the love you will share with someone your age. My love is steady, constant, and safe. It's the foundation you build your heart upon. It's not a replacement for romantic love, but it's what allows you to know you deserve love." Ethan exhaled deeply, resting his head against the couch. "I think I understand, Mom, but it's still hard. My heart wants something it can't have right now. I feel like I'm holding on and letting go at the same time." Sarah smiled gently, her eyes soft. "That's because your heart is learning balance. You're learning how to let yourself care, how to let yourself be disappointed, and how to grow from the experience. You're learning what matters, what doesn't. That process is what makes you ready for someone who can truly walk beside you. He looked up at her, hope flickering faintly amidst the sadness. Do you really think I'll find someone like that? I do, she said without hesitation. But you need patience. You need time to heal from the feelings you have right now. Healing isn't about forgetting someone, it's about understanding why your heart aches and letting yourself grow from it. When the time is right, your heart will be ready to give love fully, without fear or confusion. Ethan absorbed her words, the tension in his body slowly easing. He leaned back, his hands unclenching, his eyes brightening slightly. For the first time in days, he felt a small sense of peace. A feeling that even though the pain hadn't disappeared, he wasn't alone in navigating it. "Mom," he murmured, "thank you for understanding me, for being here when I didn't know who else could be." Sarah wrapped her arm around him, holding him close. "I'll always be your safe place," she said. "A place where your heart can rest and your feelings can be heard. But it's also a place that teaches you to open your heart to the right person at the right time." Ethan let out a long breath, closing his eyes as he leaned into her embrace. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the evening outside. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky, small points of light reminding them that the world continued, vast and full of possibilities. Sarah continued speaking softly, guiding him through the emotional lesson. "You will experience heartbreak again, and that's okay. Each time your heart aches, it teaches you something. Each time you feel longing, it prepares you for the love you truly deserve. Your heart is strong enough to heal, to hope, and to love fully when the time comes." Ethan nodded against her shoulder, the heaviness in his chest beginning to lift. He felt gratitude, relief, and a gentle confidence that he hadn't had before. He understood that his emotions weren't shameful or wrong, they were the signs of a heart growing, learning, and preparing for the future. Finally, Sarah spoke one last truth. "I will always guide you. Ethan, I will always listen, support, and love you. But the love that will change your life, that love must come from someone who walks beside you as your equal, as your partner. That's where your heart will find its happiness."